Welcome back, readers. We now enter the second, most emotionally volatile half of our tale. Eleanor's dignity has reached its limit. She knows she must risk everything, her precarious position, her husband's respect, and the very stability she bought for her family, to demand a truth that might destroy her entirely. In this section, a cruel word will be spoken, a public defense will shock society, and a drunken, agonizing confession will finally reveal the full extent of Lord Ravenscroft's deep, consuming torment. Part 4. The Painful Truths. The sight of Sebastian and Isabella together under the moonlight was a blow that stripped Eleanor of her last remnants of quiet patience. She had endured distance, humiliation, and cold duty, but she would not endure the lie of his subtle kindness, masking a continued clandestine affair. The next morning she sought him out in his private study, her composure rigid, concealing the turbulence beneath. Sebastian was at his desk, reviewing documents. He looked up, his expression guarded but still holding a faint residue of the recent tenderness they had shared. "Eleanor, your ankle, are you overtaxing it?" "My ankle is fine, my lord," she stated, closing the door behind her with a soft click that resonated in the quiet room. "But my dignity is not. I saw you last night." Sebastian's face became instantly impassive, the familiar mask snapping back into place. "I do not know what you refer to." "I refer to Lady Isabella Harrow. I saw you meet her in the grove beneath the oak trees." Eleanor walked closer to the desk, her chin lifted. "I do not ask for your affection, Sebastian. I accepted the terms of this marriage, but I insist on respect. To carry on an arrangement with another woman while publicly maintaining the facade of a devoted husband is not only disrespectful, it is a profound breach of our contract." Sebastian rose slowly from his chair, his height suddenly dominating the room. His eyes were cold, like polished slate. "You forget yourself, Eleanor. You are not meant to pry into my affairs." "And you forget your duty," she countered, her voice trembling slightly, but holding firm. "We married for security and legitimacy. Isabella Harrow threatens both. If you cannot give me love, give me honesty. Is she still your mistress?" His denial was swift and cutting. "No, she is not. Our connection is a matter of history that requires occasional private resolution. Nothing more." "And does that resolution preclude your loyalty to your wife?" she pressed. The question hung heavily between them. He paused, a flicker of genuine anguish crossing his features before his pride hardened it over. When he spoke, his voice was measured and deliberately cruel, designed to end the conversation and crush her audacity. "My heart has never been yours to claim, Eleanor. It was never part of the bargain." The sheer brutality of the truth, stripped bare of any polite veneer, hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, the blood draining from her face. He hadn't just rejected her, he had reminded her of her place, a purchased solution, and irrelevance. "I see," she whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. "Then let us ensure we maintain the necessary formality in all things. Good day, Lord Ravenscroft." She turned and walked out, her back ramrod straight, leaving the room silent behind her. She had chosen dignity over despair, but the words had pierced the armor of her resolve. Eleanor retreated completely. The ensuing weeks were marked by a silence in her rooms and at the dinner table that was more isolating than any previous distance. She continued her duties flawlessly, hosting, supervising, managing, but her spirit was enclosed. Her eyes, once merely reserved, were now utterly empty of hope. Sebastian watched her withdrawal with a growing corrosive guilt. He hadn't expected her to confront him, and he hadn't intended to wound her so deeply. He had spoken those words out of self-defense, seeking to protect his painful secret and reassert control, but seeing the life drain from her eyes had appalled him. He saw the genuine, selfless woman he had married, now reduced to a figure of stoic endurance, and he felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang of regret. He tried to apologize, or at least soften the blow. He left a rare, delicate first-edition book on her desk. She thanked him formally, but did not read it. He attempted conversation at dinner. She replied with succinct, appropriate answers, volunteering nothing more. She had built a wall of perfect, unassailable politeness, and he found himself locked out. He had married her for stability, but now her very presence was a haunting reminder of his own cruelty. The next public event was a charity gala, where Lady Isabella Harrow, sensing a weakness in Eleanor's quiet profile, chose to strike. Isabella approached Eleanor in the middle of a crowded salon, her glamour dazzling, her smile sugary and venomous. "Eleanor, my dear," Isabella cooed, loud enough for those around them to hear. "How brave of you to attend. It must be so difficult being the one chosen out of duty. I hear the Ravenscroft debts were quite pressing." Isabella's implication, that Eleanor was a social climber who had sold herself for money, was clear and designed to inflict maximum public damage. The ladies around them leaned in, eager for the spectacle. Eleanor felt the familiar heat of shame rise, but held her composure, preparing a cold, dignified retort. Before she could speak, Sebastian was suddenly at her shoulder, his proximity a tangible threat. He placed a possessive hand firmly on Eleanor's elbow. His voice, usually a controlled baritone, was laced with an unexpected, fierce, protective anger. "Indeed, Lady Harrow," Sebastian said, his eyes narrowed, fixing Isabella with a look that made her false smile falter. "My wife's family faced difficulties, which she met with rare courage and responsibility. Unlike those who choose titles over true character, Eleanor chose the future of her loved ones over her own comfort." He paused, his grip on Eleanor tightening as he delivered the public, stunning rejection. "Do not mistake a marriage of convenience for a marriage of indifference. Eleanor is my wife, and she is the foundation of my house. I suggest, Isabella, that you concern yourself with your own husband and cease to address mine." The room fell into stunned silence. Sebastian Ravenscroft, the aloof, brooding nobleman, had just defended his wife fiercely, not with polite manners, but with a sudden, devastating fury that shocked both Eleanor and Isabella. Isabella's face flushed a deep scarlet of pure rage and defeat. Sebastian didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned Eleanor away from the ruin he had wrought and led her to a quiet corner, his face still tight with controlled fury. "I apologize for her impertinence," he muttered, his voice still rough. Eleanor stared at him, unable to speak. His defense had been unwarranted, explosive, and yet profoundly necessary. It was the first time he had acted truly as her husband, acknowledging her value and defending her honor in public. She realized then that his loyalty, once activated, was a formidable, frightening force. That night, Sebastian did not retreat to the daybed. He paced the sitting area of their suite, pouring drink after drink. Eleanor watched him from the main bed, her confusion deepening. He was clearly tormented. Finally, he stopped pacing, his tall form slumped. He looked desperately tired, his facade of pride cracked and crumbling. He was profoundly, unmistakably drunk. He turned to her, his movements unsteady. "You should hate me, Eleanor," he slurred, clutching the glass. "You should despise the coward I am." Eleanor sat up, pulling the sheet to her chest. "Sebastian? She didn't leave me for money," he confessed, his voice thick with alcohol and ancient pain. "She left me because I wasn't enough. Not wealthy enough, not titled enough, not exciting enough." He took a large, desperate swallow of the brandy. "I was a fool. I gave her everything, and she traded me for a marquess she barely tolerates." His eyes, dark with a deep, consuming pain, finally fixed on hers. "And yet, the betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that I built my entire life around the wound. I couldn't let go of the idea of her, the idea of us. I swore that no one would ever see me so vulnerable again. I married you, Eleanor, to secure my position, to show society and myself that I was healed." He gestured around the vast, silent room. "But I'm not. I'm a broken man, clinging to the ghost of a love that was never real, poisoning the life of a woman who is 10 times the better person." He set the glass down with a heavy thud. "I wanted her once. God, I wanted her. But she destroyed me, and I cannot let go of the pain she inflicted." It was the raw, unedited truth, a confession of weakness, not love. He hadn't been defending a relationship with Isabella under the moon. He had been seeking the resolution he'd claimed, trying to cauterize a wound that refused to heal. Eleanor watched him weep, not with tears, but with the utter defeat of his strong frame. The cold words, "My heart has never been yours to claim," were now explained. He had been so trapped by his own humiliation and pride that he couldn't see the woman who stood beside him. She saw him, not as the brooding Lord Ravenscroft, but as Sebastian, a man in torment. And in that moment of profound intimacy, the first genuine emotion passed between them: pity from her and vulnerability from him. Part 5. Lovers Against the World. Sebastian awoke the next morning with a crushing headache and a terrifying sense of exposure. The shame of his drunken confession was immense, but the clarity it brought was undeniable. He had exposed the wounded boy he'd hidden for years, not to a confidante, but to his wife, the very woman he had sworn never to let close. Yet, Eleanor treated him with the same careful, distant respect she had adopted. She did not reference the confession, offer pity, or demand answers. She simply carried on a model of dignity, which only deepened his guilt. The real turning point came not through a grand emotional exchange, but through a cold calculation that stripped the romance from his lingering obsession with Isabella. Sebastian was reviewing old correspondence relating to a property his family had tried to purchase years ago, a property Isabella's family suddenly acquired shortly before her marriage to the Marquess. He showed the documents to Eleanor. They revealed that Isabella's initial engagement to the Marquess had been predicated on a secret financial arrangement. The Marquess had agreed to save her father's heavily indebted estate, but only if Isabella's father secured the neighboring land Sebastian had been pursuing. Sebastian realized Isabella only desired his status, not him. Her lingering presence and occasional dramatic pleas were not born of heartbroken regret, but of a calculated need to keep a powerful, wealthy admirer tethered to her side, offering protection and emotional supply. She hadn't left him for love or lust, but for a better transaction. The bitterness of her betrayal, which he had clung to for so long as proof of a great, tragic love, was merely the sting of a superior business deal. The ghost of Isabella finally vanished, replaced by a clear-eyed disgust. The woman he had mourned was a cruel illusion. The woman standing beside him, who had endured real heartbreak with quiet integrity, was the one who was real. He looked at Eleanor, watching her pore over the ledgers, her brow furrowed in concentration, her inherent worth shining brighter than any diamond Isabella possessed. He saw the strength she'd shown in saving his estate, the grace she displayed under constant humiliation, and the unwavering goodness that defined her. He walked over and gently closed the ledger in front of her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice now stripped of defensiveness, "I was wrong. About everything. My heart, it was never truly broken by her. It was merely bruised by my own pride." He touched her cheek, the gesture tentative yet profound. "You are not a transaction. You are my truest defense, and I have treated you with unforgivable cruelty." The tension between them had been building for weeks, a dangerous pressure cooker of proximity, guilt, and emerging admiration. That night, it finally exploded. Sebastian found Eleanor in the drawing room, preparing for bed. She was standing by the fireplace, the gaslight catching the soft curve of her neck. He approached her, his steps slow but resolute. "I need you to know," he began, his voice low, "that the moment at the ball when I saw her diminish you, I wanted to destroy her, not because I still cared for her, but because she insulted what is mine, what is good." He reached out and traced the line of her shoulder. "You have handled this marriage with more honor than I could ever deserve. I was blind, clinging to a ghost, while you were the true heart of Ravenscroft." Eleanor turned to face him, her breath catching. The wall of her reserve was crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. "You said my heart was never yours to claim, Sebastian. Do you truly mean to take it now?" she asked, the question laced with a dangerous hope. "I mean to ask for it, Eleanor," he whispered. "I mean to fight for it." He didn't wait for her answer. He took her face in his hands that were usually so reserved, now trembling, and kissed her. Their first kiss was born of everything they had repressed: anger at the years lost, longing for the touch they had been denied, and an uncontainable desire that had been simmering since the fall from the horse. It was not the cold duty of their wedding night. It was fire. He kissed her with an intensity that demanded a response, an apology for the months of distance, a fierce promise of what they could be. Eleanor melted into the embrace, returning the pressure with a hunger she hadn't known she possessed. The kiss was a vow, a sudden, violent tearing down of the walls between them. In that moment, the practical transaction ceased to exist. They were simply a man and a woman, finally seeing each other, finally touching. The transformation was swift and exhilarating. Sebastian and Eleanor grew closer, secretly becoming lovers in the truest sense. Sebastian, once brooding and emotionally walled off, was now passionate, attentive, and utterly devoted to her pleasure and happiness. He abandoned the daybed for good, drawing her into his arms each night, with a tenderness that healed the wounds inflicted by his earlier cruelty. Their passion was a private, stolen world, hidden behind the polite facade they presented to society. Their stolen kisses in shadowed hallways, the shared laughter over whispered confidences, and the exquisite intimacy of their nights transformed Ravenscroft Hall from a cold fortress into a warm, vital home. Eleanor, no longer just performing duty, began to truly live. The gentle woman who had feared to demand love now received it with an almost painful joy, finding her strength reflected in Sebastian's profound admiration. However, the world, and especially Isabella, was not ready to relinquish its hold on Sebastian. Isabella, furious at being publicly dismissed and sensing Sebastian's true withdrawal, became watchful and vindictive. Isabella was too shrewd to believe that Sebastian's sudden devotion to his wife was purely philosophical. She saw the new light in Eleanor's eyes, the subtle relaxation in Sebastian's shoulders, and the easy intimacy of their gestures. She realized she was losing him entirely, and her rage ignited a plan for pure, calculated destruction. She waited for the perfect opportunity, then spread a damaging, highly plausible scandal. She insinuated, with devastating detail, that Eleanor had not married Sebastian out of self-sacrifice, but out of sheer desperation and moral corruption. The rumor went thus: Eleanor's father's debts were far worse than admitted, hidden behind a trail of reckless gambling, which Eleanor herself had tried to fuel by accepting lavish, untraceable gifts from a wealthy, unnamed older admirer, a man she had supposedly intended to flee with before Sebastian's timely, wealthy intervention. The gifts, as suggested, were actually loans that the old admirer was now demanding repayment for, forcing Eleanor to be blackmailed into her marriage. The lie was vicious because it played on all of society's known truths. Eleanor's family was ruined, her marriage was a transaction, she was a young woman of unproven virtue. It cast Eleanor not as a dignified sacrifice, but as a moral compromise. The whispers spread like wildfire, threatening to destroy Eleanor's reputation utterly. The scandal was the final, brutal test. Society once again whispered that the Lady Ravenscroft was unworthy, a woman whose origins were tainted and whose presence compromised the great house. This time the challenge was not to Sebastian's finances or pride, but to the very essence of the love that had just begun to flourish. Part 6. The Final Vow. The scandal ignited by Isabella was designed to be lethal. It struck at the very core of what society valued, the purity and sacrifice of a nobleman's wife. Within days, Eleanor's quiet dignity was twisted into an image of calculated deceit. Whispers followed her everywhere, at afternoon calls, at the opera, and even within the hallowed halls of Ravenscroft. The stern Dowager Lady Ravenscroft, appalled, retired to her rooms, leaving Eleanor to face the storm alone. Eleanor was devastated, but she refused to crumble. She looked at the rumors, cruel and specific, and realized the full extent of Isabella's malicious intent. This was not a flirtation. It was an attempt to destroy her marriage and salvage Isabella's own wounded pride. Sebastian, however, was galvanized. The initial guilt and torment were gone, replaced by a fierce, righteous anger that was entirely focused on protecting his wife. The scandal was a direct threat to the woman he now knew he loved, and he saw its source clearly. "This stops now," Sebastian declared one morning, his jaw tight. He looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes blazing with a protective fire. "I have been a coward for too long, Eleanor, sacrificing you to my own pride. I will not sacrifice your reputation to her malice." He knew a private correction would not suffice. He had to meet the scandal on its own public stage, and he had to make an undeniable, irreversible choice. The Grand Declaration. The setting for Sebastian's grand final declaration was the Marquess of Harrow's own New Year's Eve ball, a place where Isabella was assured of an audience and where the gossip would be at its most fevered pitch. Eleanor, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of black velvet, a dress that spoke of quiet defiance rather than flashy desperation, entered the ballroom on Sebastian's arm. The entire room seemed to pause. The collective gasp of the society set a palpable entity. Everyone waited to see how the tainted Lady Ravenscroft and her severe husband would weather the storm. Isabella, draped in pearls and confidence, stood near the center of the room, playing the gracious hostess, watching them approach with a triumphant, expectant smile. Sebastian led Eleanor not to a secluded corner, but straight toward Isabella and the cluster of influential dowagers and gentlemen who formed her inner circle. Isabella was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false pity. "Eleanor, darling, so brave of you to venture out. I told the Duchess that no matter the vulgar rumors, the past must remain the past, even for a woman of your circumstances." Sebastian stopped directly in front of Isabella, his hand tightening on Eleanor's back in a gesture that was both possessive and utterly supportive. The crowd closed in, eager to hear the inevitable confrontation. Sebastian looked at Isabella, and his eyes were cold and absolute, devoid of the slightest trace of their old affection. "Lady Harrow," Sebastian said, his voice ringing clearly across the shocked silence of the ballroom, "the only vulgarity here is your desperation. I know the source of these malicious lies, and I know your motive. You have spent months attempting to poison the well of my life, but you fail to understand one fundamental truth." He released Eleanor's elbow and turned slightly, framing her with his body, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the crowd. He was no longer the tormented, aloof nobleman. He was a man fiercely devoted to his wife. He looked back at Isabella, delivering the killing blow. "You speak of my past. Let me speak of my future. You left me for a better bargain, and I was fool enough to mourn a shadow." Then Sebastian turned fully toward Eleanor, drawing her gaze to his public declaration now transformed into a private vow meant for her alone. He took her hands, his touch reverent, his voice dropping slightly, filled with a deep, resonating truth. "When I married you, Eleanor, I thought I was making a sacrifice of convenience. I thought my heart was still owed to a mistake of the past. But you stood by me when I was cruel. You defended my name when I was blind. You showed me what true honor and true love truly mean." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing them tenderly. He then lifted his gaze to the room, making his final irrevocable choice known to the world. "It was never her. It has always been you, Eleanor. You are not my duty. You are my devotion. And any man or woman who dares to suggest otherwise slanders my wife and slanders my name." The vow redeemed. The reaction was instantaneous. Isabella, utterly exposed, humiliated, and publicly rejected, was left speechless, her malicious scheme dissolving instantly into dust. The crowd, starved for true drama and swayed by Sebastian's powerful sincerity, turned their collective back on her. Sebastian did not wait for the inevitable inquiries and congratulations. He gently took Eleanor's hand and led her away from the center of the room, leaving Isabella standing alone in her glittering ruin. As they walked through the applauding, murmuring crowd, Eleanor leaned her head against Sebastian's shoulder, a single tear of joy escaping the corner of her eye. The redemption was complete. The loveless vows were utterly eclipsed by this final, powerful declaration of love worth fighting for. Epilogue: Soulmates. Months later, Ravenscroft Hall was finally a true home. The cold stones now echoed with laughter and warmth. The Dowager Lady Ravenscroft, witnessing her son's profound happiness, had softened considerably, accepting Eleanor not just as a suitable wife, but as a beloved daughter-in-law. Eleanor's father and sister, Clara, were frequent, welcomed guests. Sebastian and Eleanor were seated by the fire one evening, reviewing new plans for the estate. Eleanor rested her hand on her slightly rounded abdomen. The heir Sebastian had once demanded as a duty was now a child conceived in love. Sebastian watched her, his expression perpetually softened by his regard for her. He reached out and covered her hand with his own. "Do you remember the night I whispered Isabella's name?" he asked, his voice low with old regret. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her face. "I remember. I thought I would never escape her ghost." "You did not escape her ghost," Sebastian corrected, raising her hand to kiss her palm. "You drove it out with your own light. I married you to save your family, but in the end, you saved me." Their marriage, once a brutal transaction, a cold bargain struck over ledgers and debts, was now their greatest love story, a testament to resilience, dignity, and the slow, undeniable pull of two souls finding their true home in the shadow of a broken vow. And so concludes the passionate, painful journey of Eleanor and Sebastian Ravenscroft. What was your favorite moment in their journey? Thank you so much for reading and staying with us through every trial and triumph at Ravenscroft Hall. If this story of sacrifice, slow burn love, and ultimate redemption stirred your heart, Please take a moment to like this story to show your support. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful romantic dramas. Comment below and tell us which character arc touched you the most. Until the next tale, may your own journey toward love be filled with passion and honesty.